Welcome to Ministers Talking a weekly program where Rev Brz and Rev Z and their guests chat about current affairs, world events, spiritual principles, and any old they want to talk about. Based on the new thought philosophy and ancient wisdoms, Ministers Talking shares a visionary perspective of the evolving spiral called spiritual living. Join us each week as we explore the emerging paradigm of life on planet Earth and beyond.
And good morning, dear ones. Rev Brz with you over here.
Rev Z right here.
And we are a couple of ministers talking shit. And we do this every Friday morning here on the New Thought Media Network, right at 7 a.m. Mountain Time. And it's an opportunity for us to look at, hey, what's been going on this week? What's up in the news? What's up in our lives, in the world, and maybe your life? And try to make a little spiritual sense of it all. So, first up today, oh my gosh, our hearts, prayers, love, compassion. I wish I had a private jet so I could just fly to Miami and go to work.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard, not overnight this night, but yesterday, an apartment complex, an apartment tower in Miami collapsed. Or at least half of it did. Z, you were looking at the numbers this morning. I know they increased the death count to 4.
Right.
People that have made their transition at least.
Yeah.
And this is just I didn't hear about this until midday, late yesterday afternoon kind of thing. And it's just a horrific story to have to deal with. We want to raise up a lot of love and a lot of prayers to a lot of people today.
Yeah. Last thing I saw, they said like 150 something people still missing. I mean, the number, I've heard different numbers. I heard from 99 to 159 or something like that. But whatever the numbers are, it's tragic to see that, a building has collapsed and people have lost their lives. And now the investigation goes into how did this happen? What was the cause of the whole 12-story structure to pancake on itself? So, we definitely send our well wishes and prayers to everyone involved, the first responders who were there trying to find lives and bring them out. And, they did find the 10-year-old boy alive, which, I mean, in my mind is a straight up miracle. You look at that, you gasp because you're like, how, you look at it and you think the worst. So we pray and hope they'll find some others, and we send condolences to everyone who's involved with that.
Yeah, definitely one of those tough stories. I was watching the coverage a little bit yesterday. There's one of those images, and the apartment's obviously cut in half, and there were bunk beds. And we all know what that means. And it was just like, gosh. And we pray they got out. We pray that the death toll doesn't have to go higher.
Yeah. And one of the things that touches me every time these kinds of things happen is that, we see whatever the number is, but we know that number of individuals who've been impacted directly, 100, 10, whatever, that number is multiplied by, 50 in terms of the other people, family that are involved directly, the first responders, and how it begins to change our perception of life, no matter what the situation is. And so, for me, it's always, these things are always indications or always opportunities for me to dig deeper into my heart and say, how do we deal with these things in life? How can I be a positive force? And how can we uplift everybody to de-escalate, raise love, and that whole thing? Although this was, a different kind of story with the building collapse, but it just opens me up like that.
And we don't know if there's neglect there. We don't know if it's 40 years old. It's on a beachfront. It's been hammered by hurricanes, all those things. And I agree with what you're saying, Z, right? We come to that point where it's more important to do the right thing than it is to do the money thing. It's more important to be with people than it is to get something accomplished. It's more important to support each other than it is to get to the job or get an extra 10% off my TV. Whatever it might be, there's more imperative, more important things. To steal your favorite line, right? Life is prime.
Prime.
And that's important. Now, it wasn't all bummer news yesterday, though, folks, this week. It wasn't all bummer news. Well, maybe it is for some. I think the news yesterday was probably a bummer for Rudy Giuliani and his family. Mr. Giuliani. And I actually heard a really interesting commentary about this yesterday. I listened to more than a few of those political pundits that have these wonderful YouTube shows now. And I'm not going to tell you which because I'm not here to promote them. But the point the guy made was when he was a kid growing up in New Jersey, Rudy Giuliani was a hero. And I'm going to agree with that. I grew up in New Jersey, New York. Rudy Giuliani was a good guy. He was trying to affect change. He was trying to, at least it always seemed like that. Now, maybe I was just a naive kid, right? But it seemed like Rudy wasn't just another one of those hack politicians. Unfortunately, now it would appear that the appellate Supreme Court of the District of New York would think otherwise and have suspended Rudy's law license. And he is currently suspended from practicing law in the state of New York. He is also licensed in Washington, D.C., and what I understand is Washington, D.C. is immediately informed when something like this happens. There's a really good chance Rudy Giuliani is going to be disbarred.
Wow. And
held accountable for his personal choices.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Giuliani has a storied history. Because I was living in New York when Giuliani became the mayor of New York in the 80s during the crack epidemic. You're a
little older than I am, and I was younger, and I was a little younger and a whole lot whiter living in Jersey. So here it is, folks. Right? This is how we get to how it happens.
How you get the perspective. So right. I was living in Harlem when Giuliani was, in office and attacking the crack epidemic in New York City. When they increased the police and the stop and frisks and that whole episode of his career, and then you take that and you go all the way up to the Twin Towers, So as we go through that history, there is ups and downs like there are in all lives, but
right.
When I look at some of the tactics that were used in Harlem, and I had friends who were officers on the police force during this time. Some of that stuff was questionable as to the way they went about doing things. Now, I don't even want to begin to go down the whole crack epidemic thing and how that unfolded. That's the episode unto itself. But,
yes.
But I can say this, that there were a lot of places in Harlem that were crack houses, crack dens that they went in and emptied and whatever. And now those buildings have been sold to people who weren't a part of that community. Mm-hmm. That's a fact. And so, I don't know if there's any planned design. I'm not saying any grand conspiracy. I'm just telling you what I know because I lived there when it happened. And it is a different opinions about how Giuliani did as a mayor from a black perspective.
There you go. Exactly. And see, folks, these are the conversations we've got to have more and more and more across America. We've got to be able to look at these things and with a critical eye. We're going to get to that word in a little bit here today too, folks. That's a whole episode on itself. But we've got to learn how to look at what's going on in the world, and accept other perspectives and be open to other people's perceptions of what's going on or what happened or what didn't happen. I know I've been guilty of it in the past, and it hurts when any conversation gets to somebody saying, no, you just don't get it. Like, no, you just don't get me.
Yeah.
I get it. Z gets it. We just get it from a different viewpoint.
Right.
We're on other sides of the river from each other that seem to be were worlds apart. Because a guy like me, I didn't go to Harlem. Not unless I was escorted, not unless I was invited, not unless somebody was taking me somewhere to see some guy like me. That wasn't, no. So I couldn't possibly have the same perspective.
Right.
To honor that, to be open to that, to say I am willing to let my mind be changed by new information. Now, to me, that's the philosophy we live.
Exactly. And that's why dialogue, conversation, open at the top, if you will, because no one can be 360 on a situation unless you're hovering above it. Right. And so, because the different perspectives is what allow us to get a full understanding or better understanding with more information. So when we see now these different topics about race and social justice and equity, we've only been presenting these things to the general public from one perspective. And even if it's wrong, if we present it long enough, it becomes the prevailing idea. And we hold that as a standard, even though it's not, because there's, let's say there's you're only getting 1/4 of the perspective. There's another 3/4 that you have no idea about. And so we have to begin to have citizens involved, and everyone gets involved. That was, something we talked about before in terms of that situation that just happened down in South Carolina with 2 brothers who were arrested or something.
Yep. It's a woman. A woman saw a police car pulling over another car in a gas station. 2 young black men. So she pulls out her phone and starts a Facebook Live and records and broadcasts the whole incident, which I think is fabulous, right? Now, I think it's fabulous that she did this. I think it sucks that people of color have been trained, however we want to say it, to immediately have to document everything they see in a police stop. Right. And I applaud that we're doing this, because we're finally shining some light on the aggressive tactics. And this is a physical altercation that goes way too far by the police for nothing. They pretty much got the guys. They know the guys aren't hiding any guns. They pulled them over for, quote, weed. And the whole experience gets way too violent. Again, it has rarely ever been my experience that the first thing I do when I see a traffic stop is pull out my camera and start filming. But I'm telling you, that's what's going on from now on. And white folk in this country, especially if you see a traffic stop with a person of color, I don't care how late you are to pick up the kids. I don't care if your latte is going to get cold. Pull over, pull out your phone, and start filming. I believe this is a non-violent form of holding the police accountable, because this is another one where it's gone too far.
Yeah.
And in a minute, I'm going to tie this into, or in a few minutes, we'll tie this into our main story of the day, because we haven't even gotten to our main story of the day. But let's unpack this one a little bit, Z, right? Couple of young black guys, and it's not like they're in the wrong place. They're in their relatively in their hometown. They get pulled over. A few white cops start saying this, that, the other thing, and from what I can see, these two young men are like, no, wait a minute, man, no, that ain't us. That ain't me. And then that's immediately construed as, okay, sick them,
right?
Let them have it,
right? Well, you know, part of the challenge that officers have a thought pattern of, right, is that when they stop you and they ask you to do something, they expect you to comply, right? Pull over, cut off the car, take the keys out, whatever the deal is, right? But now too many people have found that they've done that and they've still found themselves in dire situations. So right, wrong, or indifferent, the ability to comply with the officers is not always going to be received openly. And then the officers at that point sometimes thinks, okay, you're challenging my authority. I am in the authority to do this. You're challenging it. And then if that officer, who theoretically is in control because he is the law enforcement, and we respect law enforcement, but if he goes beyond that and feels personally attacked just because we're into a verbal conversation, then that's another ball game. And that's what happens often with young people in general, black people specifically, is that they have seen the different things and taxes that have used, and so now they're either afraid or they may be brazen. That's what kids do. And the law enforcement officers should be trained to talk that down or bring that escalation back down, and it doesn't happen. And so it again, there was an old Richard Pryor joke where Richard Pryor was saying, the officers are in the other neighborhood. They're not in our neighborhood. So when they're in the white neighborhoods, they're hi, Officer Timpson. When they're in the black neighborhood, it's like run. It's not hi, Officer Timpson, and that persists till today.
Yeah, I would agree. Yes. Right. Again, as a white kid, you were taught, yeah, just do what he says. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
I've never had to have the talk with my kids, and I'm sure you have had with yours. We've had talk, right? We've had other, but my talk would generally be, look, you're a white kid. Comply. Do what he says. Yeah. The worst that's going to happen is you end up in jail, and then you call me and we'll figure out how to get you out. Right. But you don't fight. You don't fight. You don't resist. You don't push. You don't argue. But I know me too, and I know my sons. And if you tell him the sky is yellow, and he looks up and sees the sky is blue, he could tell you that you're full of shit. And unfortunately, most officers take that as, okay, well now it's on.
It's on.
Now it's on. And I'm big and I'm bad and I'm trained for this and I'm going to use this.
Yeah. And so, again, we talk about this all the time. Again, they just drop that spiritual perspective on it. Everything is connected, right? There are no isolated incidents in the universe. Nothing just happens isolated by itself in a vacuum. And so the more these kinds of things happens, the more people are not able to begin to see the uniqueness and connectedness of everything. These things begin to spiral out of control until they become a problem. And then we want to come up with the werewolf scenario. We want a silver bullet just to kill that one thing and think it's going to solve all the problems. But it's everywhere now. You can't just, you need more than that one bullet approach. I hate that analogy. No. But that one approach to solving the problem is not going to work anymore in the complex world that we're living in now.
Exactly. Hey, Linda, we're with you, girl. Applying the science of mind principles to current events, especially disasters and quarrelsome political discourse, is often, I don't even say usually, is almost always challenging for me. And that's why we have each other. That's why we have programs like this. It's also why we have friends and colleagues. And I'm sure Z would share the same thing. I'm on the phone almost every day with a colleague that where we're kind of hashing something out, and whether they called me or I called them, there's always, we've got to process through it. We got to be able to get out of the immediate emotional impact that happens to look. Now, I was taught when I came into this movement to look for the collateral good. We've discussed earlier how some of these events will affect the generations around us and the family, and there is that collateral trauma that happens in horrific events as well. The trauma, the collateral trauma, is almost immediately visible.
Yes.
And we know how to deal with those things. We create a memorial or where people can go and mourn and express their grief and let it out. It's not quite as easy to see the collateral good or celebrate the collateral good in the short term. We have to wait for that to happen for a while.
Right. It's like the old saying, cause and effect are not always closely related. Right. You stick your hand in fire, that's immediate cause and effect. But you look at, some other
from desktop
growing a plant, right? That may take a little bit of time. You don't plant the tree today and you see oranges tomorrow.
Right.
There may be a year or two before you see oranges. And that's how, we have to begin to think. We spoke about this one before, that in a lot of Native American traditions, their council has a thought pattern that how will this decision affect 5 generations from now?
Yeah.
Because they understand that there are no isolated events. It's going to affect, and so I need to try as best I can. What is the long range effect of this decision I'm doing right now?
Yep, exactly. So here's our big news story of the week, folks. If you haven't heard, and we've been dancing around, we've been trying to share some different stories today that I hope will open us to what we want to share, because this is like probably the most intersectional story I've heard. This is more on ramps and off ramps than California freeway interchange. And it happened about less than a mile and a half from where I sit right now. On Monday afternoon in Arvada, Colorado, if you have not yet heard, an adult male with a vendetta for police purposefully created a situation by which he could lure, ambush, and kill a police officer. In that exchange, not only did a very well-beloved school resource officer who was on summer patrol lose his life, the gunman lost his life, and it's believed that the gunman lost his life at the hands of a Samaritan, is how the police are describing this man. This man was 40 years old. Our Samaritan is more or less commonly recognized as the moniker "a good guy with a gun." Unfortunately, because we're having a gunfight in the middle of a suburban city, the responding officer, the officers responding to the man down, the officer down call, did not know the Samaritan was a Samaritan. And it now would appear that he died at the hands of a police bullet, or because of an officer shooting. My heart, This was my children's middle school. This is not some far off police officer. This is not some abusive police officer. This is a 19-year-old veteran or 19-year veteran with an exemplary record and history in the force of public policing. He's not the Derek Chauvin guy. He's nowhere near that guy. And there's so many places that hurt, Z. And there's so many places where this community wants to, like, you can feel the heaviness, the tension, the desire to explode. We went down and put some peace cranes on the officer's patrol car because we created a memorial. The immediate collateral grief we know how to deal with. We create memorials. We have a candlelight last night. People... I'm tired of asking how we solve this gun problem. Yeah. I'm tired of trying to find a vision of how we move beyond this. I'm okay waiting 10 years for the collateral good, but what's next, Z? These are the kind of calls we make to each other, folks. Hey, somebody just shot up my town. Right. How do I see a spiritual good in this thing?
Yes. And that is the challenging spiritual question, right? How do I take these things and put them in perspective to not become totally jaded or become, someone recluse who just checks out of society, or all the different ways, infinite possibilities of how we can address this. And I think, from my perspective, having had my share of ups and downs in life and tragedies and so forth, it has come to me that life is this cycle. We always talk about the cycle of life. And in a cycle, there's an up and down, no matter how you look at it. And I know for me, and I think it could be a gateway for others, is that death and tragedy are happening in life every day. And based on our position to that, it affects us more or less. Yeah. A death of somebody in your neighborhood, it affects me. But in this case, just as an example, your kids knew this officer as a school resource guy at their school. So they know the guy personally. I don't know the guy personally. I know you, I know your kids. So now my attachment, my understanding, my sentiments is a little different than yours, and even your kids are a little different than yours.
Right.
Vice versa, if that had happened in my neighborhood, it'd be just the reverse, right? And so our position, I think, in terms of a spiritual approach is that life happens, and when these things happen, it gives us, I get back to my prime objective. We go back to life is prime, and then we begin to figure out how do we begin to comfort, to de-escalate, to educate everybody so that these things happen less and less, right? And that's a beginning. There is no one solution to this. There is no one way to solve this problem or attack this perspective. But we have to begin to understand the ebb and flow of life and begin to figure out how we position ourselves within that ebb and flow, how we communicate it, and how we console or educate those on the other side that might be a little more tragic than my perspective, I think.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
It's a tough
one.
If
we had it, it is. And if we had the laser answer, if we had the end-all be-all answer, folks, we'd give it to you. The fun part is we're human too. And we're going through this just like you are. And this all happened Monday. And I was sitting out back on my patio, had a cup of tea. I was writing in my journal. And interestingly enough, I was I'm reading a book about being mindful and aware, and all of a sudden, and I start to be aware. There's a helicopter that been up there for a few minutes now. It didn't just fly over and go somewhere. It's been up there for a few minutes now. Something's going on. And the next thing I know, there's 2 helicopters in the air, and they're going around and around and around. What's going on? And it doesn't. We have within us the ability to be mindful enough to be aware of our surroundings, to stay safe, to stay secure, and to affect change. And for me, I'm sure you can by now probably recognize, for me, there is okay, this is enough. This happened in the street in front of one of my favorite restaurants. And I've sat at the window table with more than a few ministers that we would have had literally a front row seat. That is enough.
Yeah.
And for all of us. So wherever it is, wherever you might be in your life at a point of enough is enough, then that's where we take inspired action. Double down on your prayer work, call your minister, call your practitioner, get the prayer work done, figure out what's yours to do, and then go do that and take inspired action.
Go do it.
And then go do it. Of course, see, the better we get at this, the more often we run over, it seems. Or at least the longer we do this, the more often we run over. So why don't we let folks get out of here, get into their Friday, and we'll wrap this up with some final thoughts.
Yeah, my final thought is just what you said. I mean, I think you hit it. What's yours to do, and then do it. Find out what yours to do is on any situation, any place, and then do it. It could be offering a prayer. It could be lending a hand. Could be both. But we have to figure out what's ours to do to create this harmonious family. And we know there'll be ebbs and flows, but we have to begin, as always, life is prime. How do we protect it? How do we save it? How do we encourage to be harmonious and equitable?
Amen. And so it is.
So it is.
Thanks for being with us, folks. I'm Rev Brz. This is the New Thought Media Network. You have effectively invested another 30 minutes in learning a little bit more about the wild thoughts that go through these minister minds. We invite you to please invite your friends to come back and join us again and again and again. We'll be back next Friday. The Mama Power is up next with Laura Topper live from the UK, and it's a Friday, so we've always got a whiz bang of a day in front of us. The Morning Sip with Rev Melissa is up at 8 o'clock Mountain Time, or at 8:30 Mountain Time, 9 o'clock is Rev Steph with Wake Up, Say Thank You. I'll be back with the Global Heart Meditation at 9:30, and Rev Skip with In the Flow is at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. So keep on keeping on and keep on coming back. Until next time, peace and blessings.
Peace.